What's up, Outliers? Welcome to Performance Bites, for bite-sized insights into complex subjects in health and performance. Today, we're going to dive into electrolytes, which I'm kind of surprised I haven't done already, considering electrolytes are super important for performance, for overall health. They do so many different things in the body, but also I actually helped formulate an electrolyte drink powder that I will talk about a little bit in this, but ultimately, electrolytes are minerals and they carry an electric charge in the body. Yes, we are electric. We do have charges that flow through our body, and that is how a lot of the systems in our body actually work. Electrolytes are most commonly known for their hydration effects because that's what gets talked about a lot, especially in this day and age where there's so many different electrolyte beverages that exist out there. But also they're super crucial for muscular function, cognitive function, pH balance, and even nervous system function. So when we kind of look at it and zoom out, it's like, yeah, okay, I'm consuming this electrolyte beverage or drink powder, whatever it is, for the sake of hydration. But in actuality, we're providing those into our systems because we need them for so many different things. So let's kind of look a little bit deeper at that. Now, since they're electric, they do carry charges, and when those charges go off, essentially it's creating signals in the body. It helps certain things communicate, like the nervous system and the muscles communicate. And so those pieces coming together are super, super important, because if we are lacking a certain electrolyte that is super important for that signaling, it can actually inhibit or at least reduce the signaling that needs to occur. And then, everything's going to be a little bit out of whack from there. So let's take a look at the different types of electrolytes that are out there. The common ones everybody are familiar with is going to be like sodium, potassium, magnesium, chloride. There's also phosphate and bicarbonate, which I even have to look at that sometimes because I'm like, I don't really find that I come across that a ton. Bicarb is something that can be helpful for pH balance, while phosphate is a part of the building block of energy of the ATP, adenosine triphosphate, that I feel like I talk about a lot in the performance bites. So everything's always going to kind of come back to the ATP and the mitochondria, but those are kind of our main ones. So diving a little bit deeper into those, let's see what each one kind of does. So sodium being the main one, everybody's familiar with sodium because of salt. We put it on, foods. Super important. It was a big part of trade once upon a time, is being able to get good salt. But fluid balance is a really big part of it. Blood pressure, we hear about sodium and blood pressure. We're not going to dive too deep into that, but we will talk about the balance of sodium and potassium, which has to do with that a little bit. And then also nerve function. So the sodium balance in the body does play a part in the osmosis. If we go back to, I want to say like either early high school or middle school science, osmosis, high pressure gradient, low pressure gradients, essentially will call fluid either into the cell or pull fluid out of the cell. And sodium plays a major role in that. So we want our cells to be hydrated, but we don't want them to be too hydrated because then they will actually explode. So when we have sodium in the system and we have an appropriate amount of sodium, we have this nice balance where the cell has the sodium in it and it is able to be hydrated, but there's also enough sodium outside of the cell that it's playing well with each other with that osmotic pressure gradient. Now, if sodium is too low inside the cell, sodium on the outside has a higher pressure gradient and will push inside, creating more sodium in there, because it's all about the balance. Now, if there's too much sodium outside compared to like adequate sodium on the inside, then we push it in there. Now we have cellular issues. But that's also where things like potassium play a part. So potassium plays part in heart function, but also in that balance with sodium, because it's basically like it's opposer. We have a sodium potassium pump that actually regulates these things in the system. So a lot of times when we see individuals, when I see athletes actually using too much sodium and not enough potassium, they won't see the actual benefits of that sodium because their potassium's so low. A good electrolyte blend is going to have adequate amounts of potassium in it certain foods we hear a lot about that are like, oh, high potassium foods, a banana. It's like in the zeitgeist. In actuality, a banana doesn't have nearly as much potassium as, say, an avocado, or even more so, the highest potassium is going to be potatoes. So keeping the skin on the potato, wash it really well, of course, but the skins on potatoes actually house a ton of potassium. So you're eating potatoes, congratulations, you're getting adequate amounts of potassium, hopefully. And then also things like coconut water and stuff provide quite a punch with the potassium. Now, calcium is something we hear a lot about, especially if you're around the same age as me in your 30s. We grew up with the big milk thing of like, drink your milk, get your calcium, your vitamin D for strong bones. Well, milk is fortified with those things to try and help elevate the levels, because the idea is to have stronger bones, and calcium can help with just that through different functions. But it's also a major neurotransmitter and also helps with muscular contraction, which that's kind of getting a little bit deep. But what calcium does is when it actually gets into the muscle, it excites the muscle and causes it to contract. This can actually be done on muscles where they inject calcium directly to it, and you'll see a contraction. Now, magnesium is the opposer in that sense of magnesium will actually help go in and relax the muscle. So that doesn't necessarily mean like magnesium is the cure for all muscle cramps or anything like that, because calcium is essentially being pumped into it, causes that contraction. Magnesium comes in, causes the relaxation. But when we do look at like muscular cramps, there's a couple different things that can be looked at. It could be mineral deficiencies, which when we look at magnesium, a lot of people are actually deficient in magnesium due to over-tilling of our like crops and stuff like that. So our soils don't house a lot of magnesium. So supplementation is very common for magnesium. I personally take a magnesium supplement because I don't acquire enough of it throughout the day otherwise. So having a supplement with magnesium helps me to be able to keep the balance, help muscles relax, which you can feel if you get adequate amounts of magnesium in your system, you feel kind of this like relaxation take over, which is why it's pretty big in a lot of the electrolyte blends that we see. Sodium being one of the higher ones, which we'll talk about like recommendations and stuff, but we see sodium being pretty high. And then we see a relationship of potassium to that sodium. And then we see some magnesium mixed in there. That's like the common blend of electrolytes for performance, because we're getting those two neurotransmitters of the sodium and potassium to help with excitation, hydration, and then we also are getting in the magnesium for relaxation. And then sometimes they'll have calcium involved in it too, which can be really good for, good muscular contraction. But calcium is pretty readily available in most of our foods, especially if you eat a whole food diet. You're likely getting quite a bit of calcium through your nutrition, which everyone's going to be different, of course, but that's a main reason why you don't see it a lot in the electrolyte blends as like a big dose. Now, chloride is always kind of paired up with sodium chloride, table salt. We hear like that combination, but chloride is just a natural mineral that is also involved in things like salts. So when we look at sodium, typically if we have a good amount of sodium, we have a even higher amount of chloride. And this is essentially to maintain an acid base to the sodium. So it kind of helps balance out that pH, which the pH being potential hydrogen. Just if we also jump back again to middle school, high school science, and we look at acid base to alkaline base and, neutral and stuff like that, there's a homeostasis in the body when it comes to pH, and we want to try and maintain that as much as possible. Exercise, stress, nutrition can affect that pH very, very slightly, not like a ton, but it can actually affect it a little bit. So anytime the body can have the right tools, being these electrolytes, to maintain a pH balance, it's going to be very grateful for them. So chloride being in with the sodium is just kind of like when you take in sodium, you're taking in chloride, because salt is usually a mixture of many things in a different ratio. So most of the time, salt is about 98% to 99%. Like table salt is 99 99.7% just sodium chloride in that combination. Meanwhile, things like pink Himalayan sea salt, Redmond's real salt, those ones are a little bit lower, call it 98%. These aren't perfect numbers, of course, but they're lower. And so they house higher extra minerals, being all these other things that we're talking about, like the magnesium, and even deeper minerals like iron and metals and good metals, of course. But that's why like certain salts, or the sea salts like the Himalayan or the real salt, will actually show color to them, not just like clear white crystals, but actually more of like the pinkish hues and stuff like that. I mean, while on the topic of salts, it is really important that not all salts are created equal, and that just means that like the quality does matter, because sometimes with salt, when we look at like a sea salt, if it is coming from an area of high pollution in the ocean, it does get affected by that. The salt's very absorbent of liquids and stuff like that. So it will actually take in those pollutants, those heavy metals that might be existing in an area. And then there's other sea salts that are in cleaner areas, like Celtic sea salt is one of the cleaner sea salts that you can get that isn't as polluted. So you get a nice mineral compound without a lot of like nasty stuff in it. But what's really cool is when we look at pink Himalayan sea salt, Himalayas. Now, when we think of Himalayas, we usually think of like Mount Everest and all those big mountains, but this is actually comes from a salt mine in Afghanistan, majoritively. And this is an ancient salt bed, essentially, ancient ocean. And same with Redmond's real salt, which I have no affiliation with, but I love their stuff. Redmond's sea salt, real sea salt, is a old seabed in Utah. So their salt is coming from an ancient seabed in Utah. And so they're able to, go in, mine it, and make a really good product that is very clean, high on other minerals, and has good ratios of, the things like the sodium and chloride and stuff like that. So really good. Also, they vary on their level of like saltiness. Like when we taste salt, it can taste slightly different depending on what kind of salt it is. And that's a lot to do with the minerals that are existing within it. Table salt tends to be very, very salty. Meanwhile, the pink Himalayan or the Redmond's real salt tends to be a little bit actually like a sweetness to it. Like it's salty because there's sodium, but it's a little bit sweet too. So that's something to keep in mind as well, because when formulating or drinking different electrolyte beverages and powders and stuff like that, depending on the type of salt that is in it, can dictate how it's going to come off on your palate. Now, with electrolytes, we take them in through a lot of different foods and stuff, but like I mentioned, magnesium being one of the ones that's a little bit lacking in our foods, but we lose electrolytes through sweating, through our urine. That's actually a big place where we lose a lot of electrolytes. The kidneys help to regulate them. So if we have too much sodium in the system, we will pee it out. And that's because of that osmotic pressure grade and stuff. So the body is basically trying to regulate the amount that's in the system to keep us safe ultimately and keep our cells safe. So if we have too much, it'll get pushed to the kidneys. The kidneys will process it and we will actually get rid of it in waste form. So really nice process there, keeping us safe. Now, if you're sick and you're dealing with like a stomach virus and you're dealing with, loose stool, vomiting, that's like a major way to become dehydrated and also lose loads of electrolytes. So that's something that I focus on so much if I'm ill, is like getting electrolytes in, because salt actually has the ability to help kill viruses and stuff like that, which is really nice, if you're ill. So if you don't have enough of that in there, and also all these different functions that I'm talking about, like the nervous system, cognitive, muscular, if you're losing those when you're sick and your body's kind of already down and out, then you're likely just going to feel even worse. So really, really important to try and maintain electrolyte balance when ill like that, because you're definitely insult to injury on that part. And then there's things like environmental factors that can play into electrolyte loss. Obviously, if it's hot and humid and stuff like that, you're going to perspirate more. But at the same time, like through exercise and everything, like everyone sweats different. So I could go in a sauna for 5 minutes and just be dumping buckets. Meanwhile, I look over at my wife and she's maybe kind of getting a little bit sweaty, maybe. So everyone sweats different, especially from male to female. That's a very common thing. But at the same time, it is for regulation of body temperature, because we also don't want body temperature to elevate too much. That can also be dangerous, especially for the brain and the organs. So we will perspirate and we'll put liquid onto our skin, which then will pull heat and evaporate away from us. But within that sweat is always going to be electrolytes. And the ratios do fluctuate quite a bit for everyone. We've done some readings with some different tools like the H drop to try and see what the sweat looks like when we're like doing certain activities, like doing a moto compared to lifting weights and stuff like that. And you'd be very, very surprised with using devices like that, how much sodium you actually lose, which is what kind of intrigued me to make or help formulate an electrolyte and have a, partner in it that we make something that we're kind of like happy with the ratios and the formula and stuff. And that was Next Hydration, which, this is a plug for them. But, I really think that we made something that's really great with Next Hydration, because we have a really good ratio of sodium, potassium, and then the magnesium in there. And we're using the Himalayan pink salt, which, like I said, has other minerals in it. Also reduces that like saltiness, aggressive taste that maybe some of the other electrolytes have. So definitely go check out Next Hydration, nexthydration.com. And give it a try. I really think it's one of the better ones that is out there. Obviously, I'm biased. I help formulate it and everything, but it is such a good product, and it's very light tasting rather than like aggressive and like syrupy and stuff like that. Now, the recommendations for the amounts of electrolyte intake is going to vary so much, because like I mentioned, when we're talking about with the H drop readings and stuff like that, we're seeing like the amount of sodium being lost from one athlete to the next athlete, the different activities and stuff like that. But I did look up some recommended amounts, and this is coming from the NIH, the WHO, and then also NASM. So general population is for sodium 1,500 to 2,300 milligrams per day. Now, that's not giving like a body size or anything, so it's very vague in a way to be like, okay, that everyone should have that, when you have, people that are 5'2" and 115 pounds, and you have people that are 6'4" and 240 pounds. So these are just general population recommendations that, these organizations put together. So don't come at me. Potassium, 3,500 to 4,700 milligrams per day. So you see that ratio of potassium being much higher than the sodium in this, and that just is really dependent upon the individual, but this is general population we're talking about. Calcium is going to be 1,000 to 1,300, magnesium 300 to 400, chloride 2,300, which chloride, sodium have that relationship that they're usually together, sodium chloride. And so the chloride is actually pretty high when you take in that amount of sodium, which is not a bad thing. Totally cool. Now, if we look at athletic population, this is through NASM, and this is where we get like a very broad amount of difference. So 3,000 to 7,000 milligrams of sodium per day for an athlete. That's quite significant. And in the amount of difference, right? So 3,000 is, closer to that, like that general population. Obviously, athletes work and demand more of their body and sweat more, so they're going to need a little bit more. But this actually takes into account, like, if you're a smaller person, 3,000. If you're a large person with a heavy perspiration, 7,000. Also, how long are you training for? How long are you working out for? So very much take this with a grain of salt. Unintended pun. Potassium, 47 to 6,000 milligrams. So 4,700 to 6,000 milligrams. Now, that's closer in ratio with the sodium as far as the 1-to-1. Now, when we were looking at the general population, that was not the case. And I have theories around why that would be. We won't go too far down the rabbit hole on that. But typically, if we're taking in call it 800 milligrams of sodium, it's not a bad idea to be taking in at least 400 milligrams in sodium or in potassium in relationship, just to try and keep that ratio together. Because like I said, you eat a potato, quite a bit of potassium. Don't drink avocado. Drink coconut water, quite a bit of potassium. Avocados, potassium. Bananas, potassium, not as much. So those ratios are a little bit closer together. Calcium, 1,200 to 1,500 milligrams a day. Yeah, that's not that much different than general population, because calcium is good for everyone. And that's the thing is, like, when we look at the potassium and the sodium, we're seeing more of that loss in sweat too, which we've seen on the H drop. But we're also asking more of our bodies through those ones. Meanwhile, calcium kind of has its function. Having a little bit more of it could be helpful for that muscular contraction and like the strength of the contraction that happens in the muscles. So not a bad idea. Magnesium, 400 to 600, a little bit higher than general population. Chloride, once again, in relationship with that sodium. So it's a little bit higher, 3,000 to 5,000 magnesium or milligrams per day. A lot of numbers. What really comes down to, and this is something I've worked on for myself, something I've worked on for athletes, is trial and error in figuring out what works best for you and what feels best. Sodium for me, I intake sodium throughout the day in different forms, as far as salting my food, through an electrolyte drink, being that next hydration. But at the same time, I can tell if I'm low on it. I'll get headaches, and then I'll actually have a little bit of salt. I'll just like take pink Himalayan sea salt and put it in my mouth and suck on it for a little bit. Headache will go away. Go figure, right? A neurotransmitter type deal with the sodium to help things relax and help muscles relax, because headache, I think, is more superficial outside with the muscles of the head rather than the brain itself, which actually does not feel pain. So keep that in mind. So, I've learned what works good for me in those instances. The potassium stuff, I can tell if I don't have enough potassium just simply by how I feel. So that sounds very woo-woo, maybe hard to understand, but ultimately your feelings and everything, when you make associations with food or with electrolytes, you'll start to understand a little bit more what's going on. Probably not what people want to hear, because people like to be able to just be told what to do sometimes, but I'm here to tell you, you need to learn how to feel your body and listen to it when it's asking for something or when it's not asking for something. Now, of course, electrolytes exist in food, whole food diet, with all the different fruits and vegetables, meat products, high quality meat products, fish, they all carry different minerals. Some of those minerals will end up being electrolytes and be very important for your overall health and muscular function, nervous system function, cognitive function, so forth, so forth. So, couldn't recommend, making sure that you're getting adequate electrolytes through whole foods first before supplementing, with a drink powder and stuff like that, because it is a supplement, meaning it's supplementing nutrition. So, try to get your nutrition in a good place to obtain, as much electrolytes through natural nutrition before you just turn to all these different, products out there and try and consume. Now, if you're an athlete that is a high sweater, somebody that will work out for an hour and just be drenched in sweat, maybe it's a good idea to have an electrolyte, because you're probably losing much more than other people. Now with electrolytes too, making sure your hydration, your water intake is appropriate, because that relationship with fluid coming in out of the cells, you need the fluid there in the first place. So with that being said, really appreciate you following along, listening to this banter essentially about electrolytes. There's a lot of information. Maybe that's why I kind of waited a little while to make this one. But you know what you're getting into when you listen to Performance Biden. It's going to be, straightforward information from me trying to help you, the listener, gain more information so you can have more autonomy in your health and performance. So thanks so much for following along. Please like, subscribe, share, comment, all that good stuff. Keep growing the page, keep growing Outlier. And also it just helps to get the messages out to more and more people. So thank you so much.